Welcome to our final event of Awareness August, a month dedicated to providing reliable health information to our community. We've celebrated with links and resources on social media, as well as 3 large programs. Our first event featured an engaging author from New York who talked about protecting our children from sexual abuse. If you couldn't make it to that event, her entire presentation has been uploaded to the library's YouTube page, so please check it out. Our second event featured a speaker who presented on understanding addiction. Please check out the library's website to see other exciting events coming up, like Time Travel Day or our own library escape rooms. Before I introduce our wonderful panel of speakers, I want to take just a second to introduce you to a great health resource. Awareness August is all about finding easy, reliable, science-backed health information, and a great place to find this is a website called Medline Plus. If you're anything like me, you've probably used Google or Wikipedia or WebMD to look up health information, and the results are not always as trustworthy as they could be. Medline Plus is just as easy to use, and all of the information is vetted by the National Library of Medicine, the National Institute of Health, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, so you know that the information is accurate and up to date. I'm going to show you how to find their website, and then there's just like a 2-minute video to explain all of the resources that they have to offer. So all you have to do is go to good old Google and type Medline Plus. And it takes you right here. And then the search button up at the top you can use just like Google. And they have a whole bunch of other things as well. So here's a quick video to show you how to use it.
Welcome to Medline Plus, the consumer health information website from the National Library of Medicine and the National Institutes of Health. You can use Medline Plus to find free, reliable information to help you make informed healthcare decisions. Medline Plus is available in English and Spanish, and you can use it on any device. Medline Plus has close to 1,000 health topics. You can find health topics by the body location, by category, or by the alphabetical index. Here's the health topic page on back pain. On this page, you can find all types of information about back pain. A great place to start is the summary. Medline Plus also offers information on drugs and supplements. The drugs and supplements page has 2 sections, drugs and herbs and supplements. You can find drugs alphabetically by name using the index. Drugs are listed by both their brand and generic name. Medline Plus also has videos and tools. You can check out videos on health topics, watch surgical procedures, explore health check tools, and play games. Still looking for more? You can always search Medline Plus using the search box. Or from the home page, you'll find links to other resources from the National Library of Medicine, such as clinicaltrials.gov. You can also find the latest health news, browse the Medline Plus magazine, or sign up for email updates. If you enjoy using Medline Plus, share it with your colleagues, family, and friends. Medline Plus, trusted health information for you.
All right, if you have any questions about Medline Plus or how to find other reliable health resources, please find me after the event or any of the 3 amazing doctors, because I'm sure they know much more than I do. During the program, if you need to leave early, use the bathroom or grab a snack. The bathrooms are through the door and the snacks are at the back wall. And with no further ado, I'm delighted to present our speakers for the evening. Dr. Shanu Agarwal is one of the infectious disease physicians at Summa Health and is the chairman of the Infection Control Committee. Dr. Tom Alexander is an immunologist at Summa Health and was an editor of the journal Clinical and Vaccine Immunology for 10 years. And Dr. Tom Feil is the chairman of the infectious disease at Summa Health. He is the president-elect of the Infectious Disease Society of America and will take over as the president in the fall. We'll begin with presentations by Dr. Agarwal and Dr. Alexander, and then all 3 will open the floor to questions. Thank you so much to our guests.
Good evening, thank you for being here. And so my job is going to be to try and orient you a little bit toward why we use vaccines and how they affect what we call the immune system. So here's a guy saying, I have an immune system, I don't need vaccines. While it sounds reasonable, it shows that the individual really does not understand how the immune system functions or how certain organisms cause disease. So my outline then is to give you some basic immunology concepts. So it's not going to be very technical, but hopefully we'll go through that. Some basic vaccine concepts, talk about the type of vaccines, the role of what are called adjuvants, which actually help vaccines. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the public issues right now about vaccines in the news. Then Dr. Agarwal will continue by talking about some specific vaccines in their clinical applications. So if I was going to ask any of you what the immune system does, anybody want to respond?
Attacks invading organisms.
Okay, attacks invading organisms, very good. So part of that is it protects us from disease by attacking invading organisms. Okay. It does that, but it also protects us from beneficial organ transplants and blood transfusions. It also causes problems by allergies. Hay fever, ragweed pollen isn't going to hurt us, but the immune system responds to it, causes allergies. And there are a variety of diseases called autoimmune diseases where the body attacks itself. Multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis are some examples of those. So by itself, protection from disease really isn't the total answer. So what the immune system really does, it does what we call self, non-self discrimination. What do I mean by that? Basically, it means that the immune system decides what belongs inside us and what doesn't. And ideally, it will protect what belongs inside us and get rid of what doesn't belong inside us. So it does this. This implies a couple of things. It implies that what belongs inside us and what doesn't has some kind of appearance. They look different. We call this appearance the antigen of something, it's a technical word. And it also implies the immune system has to have eyes. It has to see, does this belong or does it not belong? And we call these eyes antibodies, or another name for a similar substance is called a T cell receptor.
T cells, that what happens in AIDS? Gets messed up?
When AIDS hits, yes, that is basically the virus that causes AIDS can destroy some of the cells of the immune system and stop it from actually responding to the infection. So it can't get rid of the infection very well. So ideally, again, when self is recognized, it's protected, and when non-self is recognized, it's removed. So that brings up a question, how does the immune system know what is self? We're not going to get into that. We could spend 6 hours talking about that. We'll get into that tonight. Everybody's seen this before? This is what an antibody looks like. Okay? This is what the immune system makes to actually some of the eyes. So the two areas up top here are the eyes. Those are what recognizes whether something belongs inside us or not. What's down here is the leg. This kind of helps the antibody go where it's supposed to go. So there are different types of antibodies. We're not going to get into all these here. This little guy here, IgE, is kind of a pain. He causes allergies. You see allergies. But he also protects us from parasites, so there are some good things there. But we're going to talk, these are the ones that we're talking about, what's called IgG and IgM. So how do these all come out to play vaccination? Well, this is how an immune response actually occurs. This is what happens when something that gets inside us, a bug gets inside us. We have an initial exposure, but it's a fairly long time before we actually make antibodies to that. This can be a week, maybe a little bit more. But some diseases, influenza as an example, will start to cause disease within 48 hours of infection, 48 hours of exposure. If we don't make an antibody until a week later, that disease is going to take hold inside us. So is there some way that we can actually prevent that disease from taking hold inside us? But if you look here, this is what's called the primary response, the first time our immune system sees something. It makes a few antibodies that aren't very good, we call low affinity, meaning they don't work real well. But look what happens with the secondary exposure, the second time the immune system sees something. There are already a few antibodies around, but now we make a whole lot of antibodies. And they're much better, they're much stronger, they react against the bug a little bit stronger. So the whole goal of vaccination is to put us at this level. So that if we're exposed to an organism, we already have a few antibodies and we can make a whole lot more. So from the influenza standpoint, if influenza hits here, we're gonna have a bad disease. And believe me, the year we couldn't get vaccines, if you were between 40 and 60, when they had a vaccine shortage a few years ago, I got influenza. And I was driving my daughter home from a school dance, and I was 5 miles from home thinking, and all of a sudden it was, I'm not gonna make it home. By the time I got home, I had 104 fever. I mean, it's not something you wanna mess around with. So what we wanna do is if you're exposed to influenza, have you right here. So you have a little bit of antibody to help protect you, and you'll immediately make a whole lot more. So that's really the overall purpose of vaccines, to get you to this point when you see you get an infection, rather than this point. Okay. The reasons we use different vaccines is because antibodies only have a limited, their eyesight isn't very good, put it that way. So an antibody, say, that would react against influenza, that might look like that square shape, would not react against maybe herpes that may have a round shape. So we have to have different vaccines for different diseases. So that's the antibody molecule up here that we just talked about. We have another way, the immune system has another way to fight disease, and this is called T cells. And T cells have what's called a receptor on the surface that looks a whole lot like the eye of the antibody. But rather than being secreted and flowing through our blood, these eyes, if you will, stay attached to the head. They stay attached to the T cell. So it's a slightly different way that we can respond to a disease or a vaccine. And basically these T cells, if they see a cell that maybe has a virus inside it, like influenza virus inside it, they can destroy that cell. So ideally, a vaccine will give us both antibodies and T cells that are ready to fight off some kind of infection. There are a number of types of vaccines. I'm not going to get into all of those in detail, but basically we just have two kinds of things. We can give what we call passive vaccines or passive immunity. This is, as an example, if a baby is born to a hepatitis-infected mother, we can give that baby antibodies to the hepatitis virus. We're not immunizing, we're not trying to vaccinate the baby, but we're giving them antibodies to help fight that disease. That's called passive immunization. The other kind, what's more common from a vaccine standpoint, is what we call active immunization, where we actually provide a little bit of what might infect you, but in a way that it won't cause disease, to try and get you to this point. So we may have a part of an influenza virus, or part of a hepatitis virus, or maybe a measles virus that has been treated so it really can't divide anymore, can't grow inside you, and use that. Mentioned at the start something called adjuvants. Adjuvants are substances that are primarily aluminum salts, but they actually help the vaccine work better. They help us make more antibody and will allow that vaccine to give us antibody over a longer period of time. So they can help some of the vaccines for the elderly. The pneumococcal vaccine, as an example, may use that. If you have adjuvants, we might not need as many shots. We may need less material, which means that the material we have can go farther and protect a lot more people. So adjuvants are a good thing. This just kind of shows kind of an older slide, but it doesn't really show up very well with the lights. But this shows the total number of diseases in the maximum year, 1941. There were almost 1 million cases of measles, but in 2000 we were down to 100. As you'll see on the slide coming up, this year we're over 1,200 cases of measles already. We'll talk about why it's coming back up. That brings up the concept, got it over here, something called herd immunity. Herd immunity is when most of the people in a population have been vaccinated. And so if most of the people have been vaccinated, then a bug, a virus or bacteria can't really take hold in a population and infect a lot of people. So that's what's shown on this next slide. It says, why does my choice matter to others? People say, well, why should I get a vaccine? Maybe other people are getting a vaccine. Why do I need to get one? Well, if no one is immunized, the disease can spread all the way through a population. The red indicates who has the disease. When some of the population is immunized, with the yellow here, you still have a pretty good spread of disease to the population. But when you get 90% or 95% of the people who are actually infected, who are actually in the population vaccinated, now you don't get good spread of the disease. And certain people can't be vaccinated. Some people are born, you mentioned AIDS a while ago, some people may have AIDS or cancer and have a very poor immune system and can't receive a vaccine. Some people are born with a genetic defect that affects their immune system, so they can't receive the vaccines.
Bubble babies?
The bubble baby. Yes, okay, the boy in the bubble. If you saw the John Travolta TV movie many years ago, that was actually about a child who had something called SCID, severe combined immune deficiency. And that was based on a true story. An immunologist named Robert Good actually put a boy in a bubble. It didn't work real well. But he was born without a functioning immune system. So any bug that he would have seen could have killed him. So people who are born with these immune deficiencies, and there are over 300 of these that have been described, can't receive vaccines. So it's really incumbent upon the rest of us to have vaccines to help protect the people who can't receive them. And we do that by the herd immunity concept. All right, let's go away from science and kind of go into some popular issues right now. Vaccines in the news. Okay, some people say vaccines cause autism. Well, 1998, physician Andrew Wakefield published an article that linked the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, which most of us have had. Well, not really. Tom and I and many people who were born before 1957 did not have it.
I had measles and I had mumps, but I had a shot to boost because I'm going to Israel in February, so they wanted to boost it. And then I couldn't donate blood at the, what you call it?
The Red Cross?
The festival that we had, the Twins Days.
So this was an article that was published, but when this happened, the poop hit the fan, so to speak. And the idea from this article was that something called thimerosal, which is a preservative that was put into vaccines, but contains a very, very small amount of mercury. And mercury can be poisonous to the nervous system. And they postulated or thought that maybe mercury was the problem. Well, mercury has been removed from most vaccines, including the so-called MMR vaccine, but autism rates have increased, which kind of argues against that as a possible cause. And this study, from a science standpoint, was not done very well, that Wakefield published. Data was basically based on parental recall. Excuse me, your son or daughter has autism. When did they get it? What happened around the time that they get it? Did they get a vaccine? That's not a very scientific way of doing it because there could have been a number of things that occurred around that time. And it later showed, even worse, that this doctor had actually altered the data to fit his hypothesis or his thought. And nobody could replicate his data. Science goes by replication. Somebody does something, is this really true? Let's see if somebody else can actually repeat it. That did not happen. And the article was formally retracted in 2010. But it's not the end of the story. There are still court cases in the US by people claiming that vaccines cause autism. None has ever been granted. Dr. Wakefield still espouses this hypothesis. But because of it, a lot of people have kind of signed on this, and because of this, there have been measles outbreaks in the UK, early 2000s. We had measles and mumps outbreak in Ohio in 2014, and there's a current, and that all of these have been linked to a reduction in vaccine administration. Fewer people are getting vaccines because they're concerned that vaccines may cause other diseases. We have a 2019 measles outbreak right now that as of August 22nd, the data I could find was 1,215 cases. Remember, in 2000, there were only 100 cases for the whole year. We're just over halfway through the year, and we already have 12 times that amount. So Wakefield's argument is a good example of what I call a good example of bad science. What's bad science? Well, bad science when somebody tries to push a simple explanation of something that's complex that people would like to be true. And they do this, I use the term a priori, that means without evidence. That it's just, well, boy, this would be really nice if this was true. You can make a very simple explanation. Something that gets highly publicized in the popular media, you start to question that and say, what's the evidence? What really supports this. Unable to be replicated. Other scientists can't replicate, even the original scientist in this case can't replicate what he first published. And the other thing that people say, well, this is really true, but the establishment, in this case maybe pharmaceutical companies or the medical profession, don't want this to be true. So they actually have a conspiracy to actually challenge this. So these are things, not all of these are bad in an individual situation, but combined, it should make you question whether or not something is really true. Another idea is vaccines cause autoimmunity. There's something called molecular mimicry. Some viruses or bacteria look like what's in our system. So if we make an antibody to it, that antibody may cross-react with our own body. And infections can trigger this kind of autoimmunity, so some people say, why not vaccines? Well, this has been studied, but they're not supported that hepatitis B or influenza vaccines can cause multiple sclerosis, or another study looking for diabetes. So we really haven't shown this. So there may be an association, but association is not always cause and effect. That's another issue to deal with. In fact, the first vaccine actually used molecular mimicry. This is Edward Jenner using cowpox to actually vaccinate people for smallpox. But not everybody was happy then. Here is a wood carving from the early 1800s showing Jenner vaccinating people, and everybody who's vaccinated is now developing farm animal characteristics. So people thought if we got cowpox, we're going to actually turn into cows. But after all this, vaccines aren't perfect. They're not 100% effective. Okay, the influenza vaccine may only be 50% effective or less in certain years.
Wasted my shot a couple of days ago.
Okay, well that's good, and I hope it's very effective for you. Injection may cause pain or rash or fever. You may get an allergic response to something in a vaccine, and rarely, you can't always rule it out, rarely a vaccine may actually cause a disease. It's extremely rare. So to kind of sum up what my portion of this talk is, vaccines induce antibody to stop an infection in what we call memory cells to allow the immune system to undergo this secondary response that's much faster than the first response. A secondary immune response occurs quicker with higher quality antibody compared to a primary response. Herd immunity, as we mentioned, can protect the population. And while vaccines are not perfect and can always be improved, many news stories reporting vaccine issues are not supported by data. Okay, so you got to take those with kind of a grain of salt. So while vaccines don't cause autism and don't cause autoimmunity, they can cause adults. They can allow people to actually grow up and be adults. So with that, I thank you, and are we going to hold questions for the panel?
Yeah. I think
Okay.
so, yeah.
So thank you, and I will turn this over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Agarwal.
Now that Dr. Alexander sort of described what are vaccines and what they do, I'm going to talk about how vaccines can keep you healthy. So vaccines have been the topic of vaccinations has been an area of discussion for many years, has risen to the public eye in the past few years. As recent as 2016, it was a big debate during the presidential elections. Vaccines has been one of the biggest successes we've had in public health, and from the eradication of polio and smallpox disease to more recent prevention of diseases such as cancer of the liver and cervix as well. Individual decisions made on vaccinations and immunizations are not only affect a particular individual, but they affect the community to which they belong. So it's kind of nice that we're having this at the Twinsburg Public Library, where we're kind of bringing together the community, because vaccinations are not only something to protect yourself, but you protect your whole community by getting vaccinated, in a sense. So why do we vaccinate? We vaccinate primarily to stop the spread of disease. So certain diseases such as measles, meningitis, whooping cough, the flu, and those are just to name a few. We also protect people who are too sick, as Dr. Alexander mentioned. So that would be people who have a weak immune system. So whether it's from HIV with AIDS, or is it somebody who is on chronic steroids or on chemotherapy, something like that. And also we vaccinate ourselves to protect the young, so newborns who are not old enough yet to have any vaccinations. There's also economic burden of the disease. So imagine if you were to get a vaccine preventable disease and get admitted to the hospital, there are huge healthcare costs that are associated. And aside from that, the patient or the individual who's admitted, they take a loss of income. They lose income for so many days being in the hospital, and it affects not only them, but their families as well. And this one, last point, goes to the herd immunity concept that Dr. Alexander was talking about. I kind of have labeled it as community immunity. So if you put your hands together, you kind of build a community once you get vaccinated, and encourage others to get vaccinated. You as a community, tend to become free, or your goal is to become free of a vaccine preventable disease. The only caveat to that is right here. So this vaccine hesitancy cycle, if you look, the top part of it I love, but then at this point, I wish that we could just go right back to the top and not go through the rest of the cycle. But in reality, so what happens is you increase campaigns, you start to advertise about vaccines and give a lot of education out. So then you get a lot of people getting vaccines, which is great. Then you get herd immunity, or you get a lot of people who are vaccinated, and you're building community immunity, which again, great thing that we want. You get a decrease in all these diseases, but then what happens is that when you have a decrease in diseases, what happens? Do you see the disease? We don't see it because everyone's getting vaccinated. But what some people think then is that, well, I'm not too worried about that disease. Maybe I'm not going to get vaccinated for this, even though my primary care physician recommends, but I say, well, I haven't seen measles, I haven't seen anything. So then we start to get on this part of this cycle, and people start to not get their vaccines, or they start to question them. And then we see the reemergence of new diseases.
Aren't you a little optimistic that there'll be increased vaccine uptake after the disease? I mean, it's increasing now, it doesn't, people seem to be even more afraid of vaccines.
Right, I mean, and that's why we continue to educate, continue to give a lot of, data out there and give the numbers. But that's why we, continue to educate to get that increase in vaccine uptake. So can someone tell me what disease this is?
Polio.
Yeah, right. So polio is one of those diseases. In 1979, it was actually eliminated from the United States due to widespread vaccination. However, polio has not been eradicated worldwide. As you can see, in 2018, there's still a few spots that are left there that we still see some cases of polio. However, in 1980, smallpox was considered eradicated by the World Health Organization. And here you can see a lot of the countries that at this point in these years, they had eradicated smallpox. So, which vaccine preventable disease is this? These are both the same. Now this is without vaccine, and the picture over there is when the individual got the vaccine.
Smallpox.
Not smallpox.
Measles.
No. I guess it's kind of a non-specific rash, but any other guesses? So this is actually a rash of chickenpox. Chickenpox. So this is an individual that was not vaccinated. This is an individual who was vaccinated, but as Dr. Alexander said, all the vaccines are not 100% effective, but when you do get the disease after having a vaccine, the disease is usually less severe than if you were to get it without having the vaccine on board. So before the chickenpox vaccine, approximately 4 million cases per year is what we saw in the United States, 10,500 hospitalizations, and 100 to 150 deaths. The vaccine was introduced in 1995. Now my children have gotten the vaccine, so they've never had it. And actually, I was kind of rehearsing my slides with my 8-year-old, and she was like, "Mom, what's that?" And then it's interesting because I remember when I was 8, my dad took us to a place so we could get chickenpox from other family friends or other kids, because having chickenpox as a child is less severe than having it as an adult. But now we don't see as much, we don't see chickenpox because of the vaccine. This is just a list, I'm sorry, the quality of the slide is not very good, but this is just a list of other diseases that we vaccinate for: diphtheria, hepatitis A, B, the shingles virus, mumps, pertussis. So this is just a list of a whole bunch of other diseases. This is a brief overview. If you, a lot of pediatricians' offices will have these sort of schedules, vaccination schedules posted. And basically, it kind of gives a run-through of from birth to 6 years what vaccinations these children should get. And this is the graph that we use for children 7 to 18 years old, and these are all the different vaccines that are listed. And then also, adults also have an immunization schedule that we follow as well. And these are some of the immunizations that we give for adults. And with that said, you know, a lot of times when we think of vaccines, we always kind of link it to children getting vaccines. But to be honest, you know, do adults need vaccines? And yes, adults do. Most adults believe that vaccines are usually just for children and forget to remember that they need vaccines as well. More and more adult vaccines are being offered to prevent diseases such as influenza or the flu, pneumococcal disease, whooping cough or pertussis, human papillomavirus, and shingles are all vaccine preventable diseases. And as a community, going back to my first point, we need to not only focus on the children and immunize the children, but we also need to focus on adult vaccination as well. So the importance of adult vaccination. Some adults no longer are protected by their childhood vaccinations. They're more likely to have chronic medical conditions. So as adults get older, they can have lung disease, diabetes, other health conditions that make them more prone to getting certain infections. And adults are living longer. By 2030, 1 out of 5 adults will be 65 years or older. So what I describe as healthy living is not only diet, exercise, but being aware of vaccinations as well. So something to definitely bring up with your primary care physician if they haven't brought up, you know, already. So just to go through some specific vaccinations, influenza or the flu vaccine is offered yearly, is recommended to get yearly influenza vaccine for individuals 6 months or older. The flu vaccine has shown to reduce flu illnesses, hospitalization, and even death in children. And it's very important for people who have chronic health conditions. I wanted to hit on this point. Vaccinating pregnant women is very important because the flu can be very severe in pregnant women, causing hospitalization. And it's also not only protects the pregnant female, but protects the baby from flu infection for several months after birth before the baby can be vaccinated. In 2017, the flu vaccine was shown to be life-saving in children. And while some people who get vaccinated still get sick, a common comment I get from some patients in my office were like, well, Dr. Agarwal, I got the flu shot, but I still got the flu, but the severity of the flu is, from several studies, has shown to be less. And the key thing is I tell my patients, well, at least you're alive and you're standing in my office. Because I know in the community you may not see, but as clinicians, when we're in the hospital and with our specialty, we see very, very sick people who are on the ventilator with flu, and it's very hard to see. So, you know, flu can cause severe illness. Human papillomavirus, so this is a vaccine that came out about 2006, and human papillomavirus is a virus that causes is one of the most common sexually transmitted diseases that can be a precursor to genital warts and also cervical cancer of the oral area, and cancer of the rectum. And there's hundreds of different types of human papillomavirus, but there's some specific ones that are linked with these cancerous lesions. An estimated 80% of sexually active people can contract it at some point in their lives. 14 million new infections occur yearly in the United States, and about 79 million people, men and women, are thought to have an active HPV infection at any given time. So HPV can infect anyone who has ever had a sexual encounter. The vaccine, like I said, came out in 2006, and infections with HPV types that caused most HPV cancers and genital warts was dropped by 71% with the vaccine. The dose is, like I said, 2 to 3 dose vaccine series that can start from age 9 and go to 26. Of recent, they've approved it in age groups from 27 to 45, which is actually huge because of people have different lifestyle behaviors and whatnot, and With the shared decision with your physician, we do offer it in this age group depending on the patient's risk factors. So this is something that's pretty new and really nice to know that we can give it in the 26 and older. So can someone tell me what this disease is? Any guesses? So this is actually herpes zoster or shingles. So shingles is caused by the herpes zoster. Herpes zoster is caused by reactivation of previous varicella zoster virus, which is a chickenpox virus, and it causes a painful rash. The big thing about shingles is that with increasing age, there's what they call post-herpetic neuralgia, or a very painful sort of syndrome that follows the rash of the shingles, and it can be kind of a stabbing, burning pain that can be very debilitating for a lot of people because it's kind of nerve related. So, and that risk for that post-herpetic neuralgia increases with increasing age greater than 60. Other complications that you can see with shingles, as you can see with this poor patient, it's surrounding her eye. You can get loss of vision, you can get meningitis from shingles, and can cause a whole bunch of other superimposed infections. So we have 2 shingles vaccines that are approved at this point. This Zostavax was in 2006, and one that just came out 2 years ago in 2017 was the Shingles Vaccine. At this point, unless there's any contraindication, we recommend doing the Shingles Vaccine for ages 50 and above. And because in clinical trials, the efficacy was much better than that with what we saw with the Zostavax, especially in age groups that were 70 years and older, we saw 91.3% efficacy. So at this point, this is the vaccine we recommend. And just to end with pneumococcal disease, which is a bacterial infection caused by Streptococcus species. Commonly we see it in children, and it can cause ear infections in children under 2 years old, and it can cause sinus infections, meningitis, pneumonia, and blood infections. There's over 90 different types of serotypes of Streptococcus. 62% of the serious disease is caused by 10 specific types, and that's kind of where the vaccines are geared towards. It's most severe in the very young and then the elderly population. We do have vaccination available and it's given to children younger than 2 years of age, and then again at age 65. The time in between that, the vaccination, we do give it to some individuals depending on risk factors. So pneumococcal disease is another bacterial infection that we see. So what are our barriers to vaccinations? They're actually at all different levels. We see system barriers, so we see barriers when it comes to supplies of vaccines. I run the travel clinic over at Summa Health, and sometimes, you know, the manufacturer doesn't have a supply vaccine and stuff, so we run into those difficulties. Insurance issues are sometimes an issue. Provider barriers, sometimes the primary care physicians may not be informed about some of the changes with immunization, so they may fail to mention it at the visit, so we do see some barriers there. And there's always patient and parent barriers. Patients and parents may not understand that vaccines prevent disease, or even those schedules I showed you are so confusing that they may not understand those correctly. And then there might be some other fears, like fear of pain from the injection site or perceived side effects from the vaccine, which Dr. Alexander alluded to as well. So, you know, like I said, we do see there are barriers to vaccinations, but all we can do is continue to educate our patients and educate the community on vaccination and immunization. So with that conclusion, I'd like to say, don't wait, but vaccinate. This is just a photo of just a happy, healthy community, which we hopefully can, you know, I feel like we achieve it, but we need to continue to maintain that healthy community with vaccinations and good health. So let's strive to be the healthiest community with diet, exercise, and vaccinations. Thank you.